In this episode, we take retention rules off the page and turn them into real-world action because deciding how long to keep data is only half the job, and the other half is actually getting rid of it in a way you can defend. Disposal and deletion sound simple until you remember that personal data rarely sits in one place. It lives in production databases, analytics pipelines, email systems, support tools, logs, archives, and vendor platforms that may copy it again. Beginners often imagine deletion as a single button that erases everything instantly, but operational deletion is more like a carefully controlled set of actions that reduce what exists, reduce what is accessible, and leave evidence that you did what you said you did. The word defensible is important here because disposal is not only a technical action. It is also something you may need to explain to auditors, regulators, or individuals who ask what happened to their data. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe how a privacy program executes disposal across systems and vendors with clear scope, reliable methods, and documented proof. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Defensible disposal starts with understanding what you mean by deletion, because in privacy operations the word can refer to different outcomes. Sometimes deletion means removing a record entirely from a system so it no longer exists in the active dataset. Sometimes it means de-identifying the record so it cannot reasonably be linked back to an individual, which can preserve business value while removing identifiability. Sometimes it means disabling access and restricting use, such as moving records to an archive with limited access while keeping them for legal obligations. If you treat all of these outcomes as the same, you risk telling people something inaccurate, like saying data was deleted when it was only archived. A defensible process therefore defines deletion outcomes by data type and context, and it uses precise language internally so teams execute the right action. This clarity is the foundation for honest transparency and for consistent rights fulfillment. The next step is scope, because disposal can fail when teams do not agree on where data lives and what copies count. Scope includes primary systems of record, secondary systems that receive copies, and derived datasets that may contain personal data in transformed form. It includes communications platforms where personal data appears in messages or attachments, such as support tickets and email threads. It includes monitoring logs and security events, which can contain identifiers even if they are not obvious. It also includes vendor systems that process data on your behalf, and sometimes partner systems where the relationship is more complex. A defensible disposal process starts by linking scope to inventories and data flow maps, not to guesswork, because missing one system can turn a deletion promise into a partial truth. Once scope is defined, you need a trigger model that determines when disposal starts, because different triggers create different operational requirements. Time-based triggers come from retention schedules, such as deleting records older than a set period, while event-based triggers come from lifecycle events like account closure, contract termination, or ticket resolution. Rights-based triggers come from data subject requests, where deletion might be required or expected under applicable law and context. Incident-based triggers can also exist, such as when a dataset was collected improperly and must be purged to remediate harm. Each trigger type requires coordination across systems, because the same event must be recognized consistently, or else some systems will delete while others keep data indefinitely. Defensibility depends on being able to show that triggers are defined, detected, and acted upon systematically rather than randomly. Operational deletion also depends on identity resolution, which is the ability to match records to the correct person or entity across multiple systems. If a customer is identified by email in one system, by account number in another, and by device identifier in a third, you need mapping logic or reference keys that allow you to locate all relevant data. This is where earlier work on collection points and data quality becomes critical, because inconsistent identifiers lead to incomplete deletion or, worse, deleting someone else's data. A defensible process defines authoritative identifiers and matching rules, such as requiring multiple matching factors for high-risk deletions. It also defines what happens when identity cannot be confidently resolved, such as asking for additional verification or limiting the scope to known accounts. The principle is simple. Better to be incomplete with documented limitations than to be overconfident and wrong. Deletion methods vary by system, so a defensible process uses standardized playbooks that tell system owners exactly what to do and how to confirm completion. In a modern application database, deletion might involve removing rows or setting deletion flags that trigger cascading cleanup. In an analytics warehouse, deletion might require removing records and also removing them from derived tables and feature sets. In a customer relationship management platform, deletion might involve both record removal and suppression of future imports. In file storage, deletion might require removing documents from shared drives and ensuring access links no longer work. In ticketing systems, deletion might be restricted because tickets are part of a business record, so the defensible approach might be redaction or restricted access rather than full deletion. The playbook approach matters because it reduces variation, and variation is the enemy of defensibility. Logs and telemetry deserve special attention because they are a commonplace where organizations retain personal data longer than intended, often without realizing it. Security logs can include user identifiers, IP addresses, device identifiers, and activity traces that can be personal data when linked to a person. Operational logs can capture form inputs, error messages, and request parameters that accidentally include personal details. These records are high volume, and deleting individual entries can be difficult, so organizations often rely on time-based log retention and controlled access instead of case-by-case deletion. A defensible disposal program therefore defines log retention explicitly, minimizes personal data in logs where possible, and documents when logs are exempt from individual deletion due to technical constraints or security needs, depending on law and policy. The key is to be deliberate rather than accidental, because accidental retention becomes very hard to defend when questioned. Backups are another complicated area, and beginners often think backups are simply copies that can be treated like normal storage, but backups are designed for recovery, not for selective editing. Many organizations cannot practically delete one person's record from historical backups without undermining integrity or creating massive operational risk. A defensible approach usually defines backup retention periods, restricts backup access, and ensures that if data is deleted from production, it will not be restored back into active systems except as part of controlled recovery, after which deletion procedures are reapplied. This means your disposal process should include a policy for backup handling that is realistic and documented, and your communications should be careful not to imply immediate erasure from every historical snapshot if that is not feasible. Defensibility here is about honesty and controls, limited backup retention, strong access restrictions, and clear restoration procedures that respect deletion commitments. Vendors add another layer because disposal cannot stop at your boundary if vendors are holding or processing data on your behalf. For processors, you typically have the right and responsibility to instruct deletion, return, or de-identification according to contract terms. A defensible vendor disposal process includes a clear method for sending deletion instructions, tracking vendor acknowledgments, and confirming completion where possible. It also includes timelines that align with your own obligations, because you cannot meet a deadline if your vendor takes months to act. Some vendors provide deletion reports or application programming interface confirmations, while others require manual support tickets, and your process should standardize how those interactions are managed. If a vendor cannot support required deletion, that is a vendor risk that must be addressed, either through contractual remediation, technical integration changes, or choosing a different provider. The Privacy Program Manager's role is to ensure vendor disposal is treated as part of the end-to-end process, not as a hopeful assumption. Not all external relationships are simple processor relationships, so the disposal process must also handle cases where another party is a controller or recipient with its own obligations and discretion. If you share data with another controller, you may not be able to force deletion, but you may be required to inform them of a correction or to provide information to the individual about where their data went. A defensible program tracks these disclosure relationships and defines how to respond when someone requests deletion or complains about sharing. The process might include notifying relevant recipients when appropriate and documenting that notification while being transparent about limits on your control. This is another reason accurate records of sharing and recipients matter, because you cannot responsibly coordinate deletion or notifications if you do not know who received what. Defensibility is not about claiming total control. It is about demonstrating you did what you were responsible for and communicated limits clearly. Evidence and documentation are the backbone of defensible disposal because deletion is invisible to the person asking and often invisible to auditors unless you can show proof. Evidence can include deletion logs, system screenshots of configuration, vendor confirmation messages, ticket records, and automated job reports showing completion. Documentation should capture what was deleted, where it was deleted, when it was deleted, who performed or approved the action, and what exceptions applied, such as legal holds or retention requirements. It should also record any partial outcomes, such as when certain records were retained for legal obligations and access was restricted instead of deletion. This documentation supports accountability and protects the organization from accusations of ignoring requests or violating its own policies. It also improves operational learning, because repeated deletion cases reveal which systems are hard to manage and where automation would reduce risk. Defensible disposal requires strong internal coordination because multiple teams often need to act, and delays or misunderstandings create inconsistencies. The privacy team may coordinate, but system owners execute actions, security reviews potential impacts, legal advises on exceptions, and customer support communicates with the requester. To keep coordination smooth, the process should define roles, escalation paths, and service levels for internal responses. It should also define how to handle conflicts, such as when a business team wants to retain data for analysis, but the retention schedule says it should be deleted. The Privacy Program Manager's task is to ensure disposal decisions follow defined rules, not individual preferences, and that exceptions are documented and approved appropriately. A well-run program treats disposal as routine work with clear ownership, not as a special favor that depends on who asks. Quality control is the last piece, because even well-designed deletion workflows can fail quietly due to system bugs, synchronization jobs, or human error. A defensible program includes validation steps, such as checking that deleted records are no longer accessible, ensuring suppression flags persist, confirming downstream systems did not re-import data, and verifying vendor actions where possible. For automated retention deletions, validation might involve sampling data older than the retention period to confirm it is gone. For rights-based deletions, validation might involve checking key systems in the scope list and recording confirmation. If validation finds a problem, the program should have corrective steps, such as fixing integrations, rerunning deletion jobs, or tightening controls around data exports. Defensibility grows when you can show not only that you performed deletion, but that you checked and corrected issues when discovered. As you bring this episode together, the main idea is that disposal is where privacy management proves itself, because it changes what data exists rather than merely describing it. Retention rules set the intent, but defensible disposal is the execution that makes the intent real across systems, logs, backups, and vendors. To execute well, you need clear definitions of deletion outcomes, accurate scope based on inventories, reliable triggers, strong identity matching, standardized system playbooks, and vendor coordination that is tracked and confirmed. You also need documentation and evidence that demonstrate actions and explain exceptions, plus validation that checks whether deletion actually took effect and stayed effective over time. When all of these pieces work together, disposal becomes a controlled operational process rather than an uncertain hope, and the organization can confidently say its data practices align with its promises. For a privacy program manager, that defensibility is not only about avoiding trouble. It is about building a program that people can trust because it consistently does what it says it will do.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.